All right, Kimball. How's it going, Kimball? We get to follow Jeff Passan. How do you feel about that?
Not great, not great. We got bumps in time. You look like you're about to break news from with breaking news from the Rose Garden. Um, it was great. I'm a big fan of Jeff Passan, but obviously he doesn't know who I am. He said, "Oh yeah, I love Eric." No, no, I don't care about Kimball. So yeah, I only feel a little slighted today. Feeling a little down, but I think you'll be able to pick me up.
Well, let's introduce folks to you for those who don't know. And Kimball, you're a children's book author. Off the top of my head, I believe the name of that book is With My Dad.
When I'm with Dad. But boy,
When I'm with
I
Dad.
hope that's not what I'm most known for, but yeah, maybe it is.
You're a former journalist. You have a non-baseball podcast with Mike Berardino and Tom Carruthers.
Tim Crothers, former Sports
Tim
Illustrated
Crothers.
writer Tim Crothers, used to cover baseball and other things for Sports Illustrated.
Like everyone who used to work for Sports Illustrated is now a former Sports Illustrated
That's
writer.
a good point. That's a good point.
And now you are a scout for the San Diego Padres. You've been scouting for, I want to say, going on 20 years for Blue Jays and Padres mostly. I won't get into the
25 years. 25.
Wow.
Yeah, since I was a writer. And I did write for 10 years. And I did enjoy listening to Jeff talk, and especially when he talked about, my former life as a journalist. Like, I could definitely relate to some of the stories he was telling.
Yeah, I mean, it's you've experienced a little bit of this now the last little while, when the Blue Jays did not renew your contract, going on for, like, I want to say 5 years ago.
Wow, this is a great day.
And now, like, what has been going on, especially just like for the last couple of weeks in sports journalism, you and I are kind of sandwiched in between two shrinking industries to an extent. Some of what we're going to talk about today, about the eye test, quote unquote, right? And how fantasy baseball players, or just, people who like to watch baseball generally, can get better at visual scouting. What are some things they can work on and look for? But some of that stuff is becoming more and more quantifiable. The way technology is being used to quantify it is exploding and changing all the time. There are, developments that have occurred across the last decade or so that aren't, I don't think, even, passionate baseball nerds, like the couple of hundred people who are watching this stream right now, probably are totally unaware of some of the developments in technology, things like visual AI that are starting to, like, use video to quantify some of the stuff that we're going to talk about today, and stuff that scouts have been talking about since the beginning of baseball, going on a century plus ago. And so I want to ask you, Kimball, when we first got this prompt, as I put it to you in text before I got frustrated communicating with you in that way and stopped, what does the eye test mean to you when you go to the field and a guy does or does not pass the quote unquote eye test? What does that mean?
Well, I think in some ways I feel like I'm a good person, a great person to ask this, because I started out being a stat geek, and I was a math student, and I didn't really play baseball much when I was younger, and I really didn't know what I was seeing when I watched baseball. I watched it, with a very uninformed eye, and it was my interest in stats and covering minor league baseball and trying to find out, like, what I was missing, what the numbers were missing, that I became more inquisitive, and I started to learn a lot about the game, and in many ways I started to trust my eyes more than I trusted the numbers. And now I think it's definitely a blend, and I'm fascinated still. Jeff was talking about, like, how much he still loves the game, and it never stops fascinating me, and it's part of that, the new technology that comes in that helps us inform what we see with our eyes, don't see with our eyes. So, I think the most interesting stats to me are the ones that sort of tell us something that are not just quantitative, but like something that we could not have determine ourselves by just watching. It's not counting stats, I guess I should say. But like, it's fascinating to all the stuff about like, induced vertical break and things like that, that sort of, you think you see with your eye, or you don't know you see with your eye, or there may be things you can't see with your eye. But I do think the eye test is ultimately maybe not the most important thing, but it's still a huge part of this. And the way I always say that is because, anything that you can measure has been done in the past, right? You're just measuring what's been done. And what going forward is going to be changed by something a player's doing mechanically, physically, mentally, right? So even if a guy's been a pull hitter his whole life, if yesterday he went and worked and going the other way, he's just became a different person. A pitcher changing how he delivers the ball, his angle or his release or anything in his mechanics could change his whole past, and you can almost throw it out. And so that's part of what makes a scout so valuable, and what makes the eye test so valuable. And of course, things that have happened at lower levels or in the past might not translate to what happens in the future. So we see with our eyes sometimes, like, hey, that guy was capable of playing shortstop in AA. I don't know if that's going to translate to the majors. But I'd like to hear your answer to the same question.
Well, I think you're hitting on some very specific stuff that is, absolutely falls under this umbrella as we get more and more detailed. Like, there are some big headline things that I think play into this. In some ways, it's harder to teach people who are only watching Major League Baseball how to have a more granular understanding, how to have a more refined visual palette, so to speak, because everyone they're watching just about is really, really good. Like, if you have, I don't know, can you see my screen share, Kimball? Can you just see that I've got like the WAR leaderboard from pitchers last year up on my screen?
Well, now I see it.
All right. So like, for instance, is there anybody on this list that doesn't windmill slam pass the eye test to you? Because I don't think there is. Like, every single one of these guys pretty emphatically checks that box. And I think when you are really splitting the atom as it pertains to this stuff, and like breaking things down to just the absolute most basic components that you can, it is just about what is your body built like, and even more importantly, how does your body move, or how is it capable of moving? And that plays into what you were talking about, where especially as more and more of this stuff is becoming quantifiable, aspects of athleticism and flexibility, whether you're in a lab on your team's complex or you're being filmed with high-speed video. Hell, I've seen, if you get close enough to the fence, like on the backfields or on, like a high school field or something like that, you can take cell phone video and send it to, your team's video coordinator, and they're breaking that down into, stuff that like motion capturing dots used to have to do for like video games and like movies and stuff like that. Like, you just need good video now. But I digress there for a second. The capacity for movement, that's you as a scout are responsible more for what the player could be and projecting in the abstract on those things, because there are teams that aren't good at player development, and maybe your org is, and you might be able to see how, especially if this can be weaponized with understanding of data, what you can look at a guy and see what might be able to be changed relatively easily to unlock a thing that isn't there, that isn't quantifiable about their performance just yet. I'm going to switch over to the hitters here, Kimball, and I'm going to, we can start talking about some specific things here soon. I'm going to use Synergy Sports and some of that video. And I know that, just because of the limitations of streaming, that the video is going to be maybe a little bit, choppy, but that's okay. We're just going to roll with it. here. But again, like, we're looking at the WAR leaderboard for hitters, and I guess if we're just really, really trying to poke some holes in this theory that I have, that like anyone who's really good at this is going to pass the eye test. Mookie Betts there were Mookie Betts doubters when he was in the minors because he's like such a small guy. When who else is on? Jose Ramirez was in the lower minors, and there was like no room left on his body for any more mass, and you're just like, what's this guy going to be? Like, we like this stuff, like underrating this is before my time, doing this professionally by like a long shot, but he's not built like Luis Robert. He's not built like Fernando Tatis, right? So there were some of those things that made people want to round down, and maybe not buy that like the ceiling for a guy like Jose Ramirez or even Mookie Betts was going to be like this big MVP level big, but like every single one of these guys is like super duper tooled out. So then let me double back to a thing, Kimball, that I mentioned before, and that's watching bad baseball. So do you think, is this eye test thing, is it pass fail for you? Are there players who, regardless of how they're performing, if they don't meet a certain subjective criteria in your mind, where it is just a no for you? Or is this a spectrum? Is this a scale? And there are players who can succeed even though they don't necessarily check this box for you.
Oh, there's definitely a spectrum, and that's true in baseball more so than other sports. I think you can go look at a high school basketball game and say, nope, none of you going to the NBA. Nope, no way. I'll bet my life on it.
Yeah.
And maybe even a high school football game or even college, whatever. You might say the same thing about NFL, but baseball, you can have different body types and different skills, and because of the different positions, and so. I go to, my motto has always been, can the player do what he needs to do to be what he needs to be? So when you see a guy that maybe is, has a dumpy body and really doesn't move that well, and then you go, oh, but he can really throw and he's got really good hands and boy, he can hit. Oh, this might be a catcher. You know what I mean? To take an obvious example. And so I think it is a spectrum, but within that spectrum, yes, I look at guys and I say, wait, I don't think this will work. I really am not in the liberty to name names in this forum.
I know,
but there's definitely, I remember seeing a player that's now had several chances with several teams. And I remember when I saw him in A-ball, I thought, no, too thick and slow. Like, he's big and strong and powerful and he's putting up good numbers and those things all suggest that this guy's gonna be good, but I just think it's too slow. And that becomes a player I watch for years to see if, like, hey, was I wrong? Was I right? And so far it looks good for me that I was right. And believe me, I've been wrong many times. But that's kind of the process. And you go back to that. So like taking Mookie Betts example, and I was fortunate enough to see him in AA. And that's where sometimes the analytics comes into it, right? Because one of the things that makes it work for Mookie is his uncanny hand-eye. And he's also got great makeup and other intangibles. But he really does have uncanny hand-eye. Mookie's swing, I don't think works for a lot of players because I don't think it's the simplest swing, but he can do it and he can generate the bat speed he needs and the strength he needs because he's got extraordinary hand-eye, to go with some other skills like his great mental approach and stuff like that. But so, I think that's where I go in this process. And so if I'm skeptical about something, I might take a deeper dive into like, well, all right, let's make sure, is there something I'm missing in the data? Is there something I'm missing makeup wise? Is there something I'm missing that maybe I'm wrong before I'm like, hard no on a guy? But yes, you go to lower levels and there's a lot of guys that just, your first instinct is, I tell people about scouting, like, it's almost like when you see a team coming off the bus or you see them walking on the field, you're automatically starting to form opinions, and your eyes are just drifting to that guy that's moving well, is athletic, has size and strength and athleticism and things like that.
Yeah. And I do think there's a difference between, and this is, I actually have this like in the outline of this convo, but like there's a difference between the look in the uniform and passing the eye test. And I mentioned earlier that like how, a body is put together. It's an important variable here because like the body is playing this sport, right?
Right.
But you have Alejandro Kirk and you have Bartolo Colon and you have Livan Hernandez. And there are, any body type can basically play baseball and succeed at a high level. But those guys are all freaky in other ways. Like they might be voluptuous, but Livan Hernandez could bend at the waist and like press his forearms flat on the ground. That's not normal.
Right.
And
he might have had the smoothest, easiest delivery I've ever seen.
Yes.
You know what I mean?
And yeah. And like Bartolo Colon, same thing where, yes, over time, like he did add more and more like adipose tissue to his body. But what's happening mechanically, like biomechanically, is so special and singular. And like Alejandro Kirk is this way too, where you can watch Alejandro Kirk swing and see that his girth is not an impediment to his movement. Hell, I would, go so far as to speculate that like having that much fat lubricates your joints, in a way that like is good for your flexibility. I feel, way, way better walking around at like $175 than I did walking around at like $155 because there's just like my joints just like collagen in my body. So we're looking right now at, and I know it's so hard, Kimball, because like, you can't, I don't want the Padres to be, hit with like a tampering charge. So I don't want you to talk necessarily about like any of the guys whose names you see on the screen right now. So I'm just going to do it. I just sorted the board, minor league leaderboard on Fangraphs by lowest swinging strike rate in all of minor league baseball. Right. So this would be like an important thing that I'll check as I'm doing the prospect lists because it's an indication of hitting skill, right? Like you mentioned with Mookie, it was different back when Mookie was a prospect because a series of minor league games was, only like 3 or 4 games, and now it's an entire week. So it's slightly different now. But obviously when you're in to scout a minor league team over the course of one series, you don't necessarily get a representative sample of like a skill like this, where bat to ball ability over like a much bigger sample, the data will be more telling than your look over the course of one minor league series, right? So it's important for me to look at this and then do a bunch of double checking on these guys from an eye test standpoint. I wrote up the Tiger system for the site a couple days ago, and Justice Bigby, whose player page I'm going to go to now. Justice Bigby was in the Fall League. Kimball, you probably saw him. I don't know what teams you covered for the Fall League, but you might have seen this guy with Salt River. This guy had an unbelievable season. Okay, folks can see on the screen right now like what his 2023 was like. He was a little bit old for the levels to which he was assigned, but this is like 70% above league average performance, mostly at AA. Yes, he was 24. Okay, but that's sizable. All right. And so you had a good, nice, long 6-week look at Justice Bigby during the Fall League, and he does not pass the eye test for me. I'm going to go into, again, my Synergy account here. This was a nice thing that silver lining as a result of the pandemic. There was no minor league baseball to go see. We reallocated some of my travel budget to pay to have access to Synergy. So let's just look at this guy, and I'll take you through a little bit about what's going on here, because not only are Justice Bigby's, surface level numbers absolutely ridiculous, but some of this like proprietary background sourced spreadsheet stuff that like, Kylie McDaniel and I are pulling and pooling with one another. Like, this is the type of thing where like, normalizing some of these swing and miss metrics and exit velocities by age, and all this stuff is happening in the background. And then yada, 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 you get 30 prospect lists and a couple 100,000 words from me. Justice Bigby's also absolutely bonkers in like all of this stuff. Like, his exit velocities are monstrous. But as we're about to see, I'm going to actually pull in his sample from Erie and West Michigan as well, because I just want as big a spray chart and as many pitch locations as we can get here. You can already see in this spray chart, folks, how much of this airborne contact is like going to right field, and how much of it is like peppering the right field foul pole. And when I start to like just isolate this guy's ball and play locations, and like especially the ones where he's like actually doing damage, here are his extra base hits. You can see it's clustered in like a pretty narrow part of the strike zone. A ton of it is going to the opposite field. And all of this is like setting off, alarm bells for me. This is a guy who I already know, or I hypothesize rather, this guy's going to be late on fastballs. Like, the fact that he's pushing this much, contact to the opposite field tells me that in all probability, this guy's going to be late on velocity. So I can like come in here and like I can filter out the velocity of the fastballs that I'm watching him see, and let's just do 93 and above. And now you can see like, not only is it even more extreme when I'm isolating like harder fastballs here, but there aren't really a lot of balls in play like at all against fastballs that are like 94 and above. And then when we put like the tape on and watch this guy swing for a little bit, we can like have that hypothesis more or less confirmed, where this is a guy who's getting absolutely worked in on his hands. His swing is long. These are fastball locations that big league pitchers, when they're right-handed, their fastball just lives up around the hands of right-handed hitters a lot of the time. It's just going to tend to be located that way, just by nature of so many right-handed pitchers being in Major League Baseball and having fastballs. They're going to tend to finish, up and toward their arm side, especially as that pitch becomes more and more popular. And we're not getting like a great look at all these right here. I should have isolated only Justice Bigby's swings here. Yes, very good, Eric.
Interesting. It goes back to one of my first, when I was covering baseball as a writer and was covering the Pawtucket Red Sox, and I had these questions, and they had a player on their team, Patrick Lennon, that some of you might remember, and he was like, what a stud physically. And he was having a monster year at AAA, and you're wondering like, why can't this guy just come and be a great power hit in the major leagues? And it was, as I saw and found out, it was like, well, he was really doing it on junk away and opposite field power. And that tipping point, like, he just wouldn't be quick enough at the major league level. He could keep you honest enough at AAA, but not the major leagues. And like, that was one of my first lessons. And like, the numbers don't always translate, depending on who you are and what you are, how you do it and things like that, which I think is, like, you're doing a great job. But now you better hope that you're right about Justice Bigby.
Right. And that's the thing. And this is the type of thing, Kimball, that's like, it has taken about this long before I can be confident to then like stick my neck out and say Everson Pereira isn't going to hit, right? Or say, Stephen Kwan like will, enough that like he's on, my top 100 list or whatever. But again, like, it is kind of a spectrum, because Kwan doesn't pass the quote unquote eye test in the same way, pardon that, like Luis Robert does, right? But he does it enough that I can project this guy as like a big league role player, a core like build around guy who just plays every day. But not enough that I think he's like hyper stud 4-win guy like he was during his rookie year. So, and you do pro scouting, Kimball. So some of the stuff that, some of the physical bodily movement stuff that I want to talk about now is less and less important as a track record of performance gets laid, especially as we're talking about big league, like baseball players. But what are some of those things if you're down on the complex in Jupiter or West Palm and you're looking at, Marlins prospects or whatever, what are some of the key things you're looking at when you're scouting like 18, 19-year-old Dominican kids who are in extended spring training?
Well, before we move on, I do want to sort of finish the thought because, one of the things that made Patrick Lennon not be able to do it was he was old for his level. And I don't think he had, and he also didn't have the plate discipline to then lay off the inside pitches enough to get to the pitches he could handle, which is a way that some hitters can do it. And in some ways, there's guys that can make that change. And, we have Yandy Diaz, right, is a monster, and he's always had great plate discipline, and he's been able to and maybe it's not a fair comparison, but I've seen like both those are incredibly physical guys that had similar approaches and swings. But and so that's part of like putting together the whole picture, and it'll be interesting. Maybe Justice Bigby will do something makeup wise or make some change, but I hear what you're saying, and yeah, that's what when we're looking at those 18, 19-year-old kids, it really is so much about what they are physically. And you just see it right away. You just see their raw tools, the classic tools, that we all look for in baseball players and how well they run, throw, hit, field and stuff like that. And you're just looking at those things. And then you're trying to see a little bit of game action, how they do it, because sometimes it breaks down and you see a guy that has all the tools, but then you see that he really doesn't recognize pitches well, or he has a terrible approach, and that can change. And it's just looking for all the basics. And I think it's easier with pitchers because, it's what they do is more isolated. You can see, well, that was 96 and that had great movement and that was a plus slider. The hitters, you don't know how they're going to react to the better pitching as they move up. So even when you get a look at them in playing and you see their tools, you don't know. And I think one of my messages to, fantasy players out there is, if you want to scout for yourself, that key point of seeing that minor leaguer breaking to the major leagues, look at him physically and ask yourself, wait, can he really play the position that he's expected to play, or they think he's going to play, or he's played in the minor leagues? Because that's a big difference maker. Like when you see players, because just because a kid played short in AA and you go look at him, and if he needs to play short for his bat to play, and then you go, this kid can't play short. And you can kind of do that with the eye test. You can see, some of those skills, these defensive skills, they can jump out at you. Like guys can just look overmatched, and sometimes can be deceiving.
All right. So I'm going to touch on some specific physical characteristics now that I think readers, listeners, people playing fantasy sports or just who care about baseball want to look for that kind of give me the sense that these guys have a potential to be very special. I don't really play fantasy baseball. I'm in one sim league. It's essentially like a sim dynasty league. I play fantasy football though, and I'm like very good at it. And, one of my mantras is win the league, like try to win the league. And sometimes that does mean like taking a risk or making a trade. Like, this year, my buddy and I, we co-manage a team. We had CJ Stroud and Patrick Mahomes. And so at one point, we needed to trade one of those quarterbacks to beef up our skill position group. We traded Stroud and James Cook for Christian McCaffrey and then we won, right? Like, but had we traded Mahomes instead of Stroud and kept Stroud got hurt at the end of the year and we lose the league. But still like we traded our depth to like have the nastiest starting lineup we could for the end of the year after everyone's bye weeks were done, and it worked out, right? So that's the mindset I'm taking here as I'm trying to get people on board with some of this stuff. I don't really care about, Miles Straw in this scenario. Maybe folks playing this do because he steals bases or whatever, but I don't care about that. I know that fantasy players do. And maybe that's relevant in some ways, but I'm just talking about like who of these guys can be absolute monsters that you should care about them in like a profound way. They can win you the league. And so let's start with pitching. Especially folks who are attuned to the stuff that like Nick and other people at Pitcher List and, Eno, folks who Lance Brozdowski, folks who want to bring quantifiable aspects of pitching to the forefront of the layperson's baseball lexicon. Some of the terminology that they're using about, induced vertical break, vertical approach angle, stuff like that, you can all see it. If you know what you're looking for and have pattern recognition for the guys who have the things that you want to be looking for, you can just see it. Okay. So I'm going to go through some pitchers here who have some of the characteristics physically that, often lead to some of the data-driven stuff that teams care about. So I'm going to, start with Matt Brash, and we're going to talk here about like things like getting down the mound, hip and shoulder separation. Again, like thing that you can quantify now. Like it's a measurement of an angle. So like everyone, I'm going to frame by frame Matt Brash's delivery here. And, hopefully we can think of some guys who aren't this athletic to compare him to, so that we can see the gap between a guy like this, who is flawed and in the bullpen and all that stuff, right? But like has this stuff happening for him. So let's, look at Matt Brash's lower body first as he is driving home. Notice how deep into his legs he is getting. His right shin in this position, he's so far down the mound right now that his right shin is almost scraping the ground. Okay. And look at now, as his hips start to come square to the plate, look how his shoulders remain closed, even though his hips are starting to square to the plate. Okay. That angle, that's like your hip and shoulder separation angle. When guys have this, like look at Matt Brash's butt. Look how big and muscular his butt is. Like you need that to be able to do this. And when you are getting this far down the mound and when, you are this low to the ground, when you release the baseball because of how deep into your lower body you are, you have bigger extension a lot of the time. You have a lower release height a lot of the time because again, like your body is so low to the ground. And, the extension part of it and the low release height are helping to, give your fastball that shallow vertical approach angle. And then other aspects of, your release and your arm angle and all that other stuff are also interacting with it. You can see Matt Brash here is more like a low 3/4 guy. There's a little bit of spinal tilt happening here that makes it more true 3/4. And this is a curve or a slider that, Marcus Semien thinks is going to hit his hands and then almost breaks over the zone. So this is, a thing that as you're watching guys deliver the baseball, this is athleticism. This is flexibility. These are the things that are elemental. Oh, that's a great shot of it from that cool camera angle that they have at Safeco, where like they've got it on tracks and you can see just how far, like, look at this guy's stride. Look how insane this is. And so these are like the athletic traits that separate the guys in college and in high school from the ones who do not do stuff like this. This is like premium A-level athleticism. And again, like Matt Brash is flawed, but this is one of those things. Can you think of another pitcher, Kimball, who checks some overt eye test boxes? Can you think of maybe some Padres?
Well, I mean, no, I mean, like, I think for me, a classic pitcher eye test is Garrett Cole, because it's remarkable how easy he does it with the stuff he has. Now, I don't, you know, and I don't know what you're trying to balance here and where you're going with that, you know, but like that comes to mind, you know, and when you just see it, you're like, how much better could this be than it is? He's a big, strong guy. And that's where, like, you know, you talk about Brash's flaw, or flaws, you know, there's almost too much athleticism there for me. Like, it's hard to have command and feel with you're doing what he's doing. And that's why you take a Garrett Cole, he can overpower you, he can outcommand you, and he has great feel as well. And it's very simple. It looks like, to me, he's throwing 97. It looks like he's playing catch. You know what I mean? Which is just amazing.
Yeah, and even here, like towards the end of the season, this does not look to me quite like peak. Everything is connected. Cole, he is not getting as deep into his lower body here as I would like him to. Look how short and kind of upright he is here at the end of the year. His velocity's down a little bit in these videos. You know, again, end of the year, kind of meaningless for the Yankees at this point. So maybe some of that stuff has to do with it. Obviously, like, this guy's a monster and has been, you know, one of, if not the best pitcher on the planet for the last, I don't know, as long as he's been an Astro and beyond, basically. So I don't think it's like anything to worry about, but it is one of those things, like at the end of the year watching Garrett Cole, it was like, that's maybe not the best. Let's see if here's another great example, right? And again, you want to win your league. So some of these guys, you know, Joe Musgrove doesn't necessarily like check all these boxes. You want to talk about a guy who like does it easy, quote unquote. Neftali Feliz is still pitching. You know, it's just like super easy and fluid, and like his body's perfect, and it's just sort of always been that way. And he's flawed in this and that, but like these are the types of things that, like, I do think you can just look for. Let's pick another pitcher characteristic, Kimball.
Well, you mentioned Musgrove. Go to Musgrove, and maybe like off the top of my head, like, obviously he's a very good breaking ball pitcher now, and he's sort of changed his delivery over the years. But a lot of what his delivery is set up to do is to help him throw that breaking ball. You know, I'll see if you agree with that statement. But
actually, I can take it to. Let me see if I can make it so that Synergy isn't super mad at me. Synergy, it's for charity. So here's my high-speed video of Musgrove from a game to, I want to say this was in the middle of 2023 at Chase Field. We can see some of this stuff happening. And I do think Musgrove is like the antithesis of some of the stuff we're talking about, where he is such an unbelievable craftsman. There are aspects of his secondary pitches that are all, you know, quantifiably great. But for me, this is a guy where you have to see it, watch this guy navigate a big league lineup, and like how masterful he mixes and locates everything. That is the eye test he passes, in addition to having like quantifiably good secondary pitches, you know, beyond his fastball. And then, you know, these are things I do wonder if there are guys, as their physical ability starts to leave them, especially when it starts to happen sooner rather than later, if they are forced into a place that, you know, they have no choice but to learn a certain level of craftsmanship that facilitates their success. These are just all, you can definitely see the hip and shoulder separation here. You know, there go his hips before his shoulders. Shoulders are staying kind of closed. And then boom, there it is. Got a nice short arm action. It's super repeatable. Very good. I do want to talk a little bit, Kimball, more about like vertical approach angle and stuff. Folks should just go put on Roy Oswalt highlights if they want to see that. I'm going to put Joe Ryan video up here because, as far as guys who are succeeding with essentially, just one fastball that's not all that hard, but just has uphill angle, which is like super difficult for hitters to get on top of. I'm going to, show some Joe Ryan stuff. Kimball, do you think radar guns maybe made scouts worse for a while at evaluating fastball effectiveness because there's so much beyond velocity that's playing into it, and relying on velocity for so long made us think that Aaron Sanchez and all these people were going to be like really good?
No, there's no question about it. I mean, that's one of the great things about all this data we have now is we can, give us a little second guess ourselves when we're either way, when we're high or low on a guy, and say, well, what are we missing, and why is he succeeding? And I always think about some of the guys I covered back in, let's see, when I was writing, it was probably like early 90s, late 80s, right? And I always think like it took Rick Reed several good minor league seasons to get a chance. And I bet you if we went back and looked at some like quality to his fastball, it wasn't just that he had good command and a good delivery, but his fastball seemed to the eye more hittable and less quality than it really was. And I wonder if analytics today would show us why it played up and eventually was successful in the major leagues. So I mean, that's, it's definitely true that, that everybody's 95 is not the same. And scouts, long ago, before we were able to figure that out, and some scouts kind of knew it. They saw some deception. They saw some maybe movement. They just understood these things, even if it was more like subconsciously than consciously.
And to some degree, I am still pushing my level of comfortability with some aspects of this. Like we see Joe Ryan pumping 91 past these guys in this video. And what I want to highlight for folks is, again, look at, how deep into his lower half he's getting. You can look at the angle of the hamstrings. This is important for hitters too, relative to the ground. Kind of see how deep into their lower body they're getting. And it's creating this low release height. And then some of this is an illusion, but some of it is just, this ball appears to have like an uphill angle that is just so difficult for the plane of a hitter's bat to mirror and make contact with. And so you just have guys swinging underneath. Yusmeiro Petit was one of these guys too. And
that's where, like, with Ryan's case, it's fairly well documented, right? Obviously that now he's struggling a bit and vulnerable to home run ball. And as I thought when I saw him in the minor leagues, like, it's kind of a one-trick pony right now. Will he be able to come up with a second trick? I mean, some guys, hey, when I need a second trick, I'll come up with it or something like that, so it'll be very interesting to see, but it's, the hitters get used to it too. And when you go up each level in the minor leagues, they don't get to look at you that long. And so it'll be very interesting to see how he adjusts. Petit, it was fascinating. I mean, Petit had a great career, and he was overlooked over and over again because the eye test was like, why are they not hitting this guy?
And so this is one of the more divisive guys in my own messed up brain right now is Shota Imanaga, where whether Bryce Miller or Joe Ryan or some of these other guys who, Brian Wu, who really only have a fastball that I feel comfortable with as like a devastating big league pitch right now. Shota Imanaga, the pitch data community is like standing at attention, so to speak, for this guy. And there's not an impact big league starter who only sits 90 miles an hour. Like Dane Dunning had a great year, but when push came to shove for playoff time, Dane Dunning didn't pitch. You know what I mean? Like John Gray pitched. And Dane Dunning, I'm not going to pretend like Dane Dunning is a great comp for Shota Imanaga. I actually think Yusmeiro Petit is a great comp. for Shota Imanaga. And I think, the contract he was given kind of tells you what the marketplace thinks of Shota Imanaga. I am not like quite as high as Nick.
Well,
Or,
but so the
on this
comparison that was
guy.
made earlier today was Nestor Cortez, and I think that's pretty fair from just watching this video for the first time. Now,
Nestor Cortez throws
has
2 ticks harder than this
feel.
guy.
What?
Nestor Cortez throws 2 ticks harder than this guy.
2 ticks? And then,
Yeah.
and then what's hard to see, and for me, that's why like scouting in person, there's nothing like it. I've seen Nestor Cortez deal in person, and I've seen how well he changes speeds and angles, and how good a command he has. It's hard to even see a few pitches of this guy in video and say he's going to have that. But I would say 1 tick maybe, but maybe really you would say 2 ticks.
I just think, that's what it is. Like the fastballs you've seen here so far are 91, 93, touch of 4 over the course of the season. No, I guess he did average 91.8 per synergy, which is about what Nestor averaged last year, I want to say. But yeah, there's just like, there's not real precedent for the guy I want to give a huge deal to at 30 years old is someone who I know is going to be in my postseason rotation. And the guys who sit 90, 91 tend not to be in there. We are coming up against the end of our time, Kimball. And rather than, do the area codes thing, we're just like, BP will start a half hour from when our game ends. Let's talk about hitters real quick. I don't know that we're going to necessarily have time. Oh, Nick says take a few extra minutes. Okay. So we will. So let's talk about hitters then, Kimball. So you mentioned, scouting low-level hitters, quote unquote, all the tools. If I had to ask you to describe the way the bodies move of some of these guys who have, quote unquote, all the tools on the backfields, what are some of those ways? What are some of those physical characteristics that still stand out once these guys get to the big leagues and they're going to be, Tatis or Machado?
Well, so a couple of things. I go back to my scout school training, and when I was moving from being a writer to a scout, I did go to what was called scout school. And I still hear phrases from my mentors there. And, one was Jim Walton saying like the number one ingredient for a hitter is strength. Okay. It's hard to be a good hitter without strength. And then I also hear him saying the good ones do it easy. So easy strength. And, you can generate that in different ways. And we talked about like, how Mookie Betts, not a very physical guy, but such great hand-eye coordination and skill and twitch as well can generate that. So I look for those things. So yes, if I look at the bodies of the hitters, and you can just see sort of that easy, fluid, raw power, and then you see them swing and you see, well, how, are they able to do it easy? Do they need a big stride, a big leg kick? Are they out of control when they swing? Or is it just like, obvious examples, like how easily Barry Bonds could just, or even Pujols, take any great hitter. But, it's obviously more interesting when the hitters are not as physical as those guys, and you have to see if like they can do it. But, those are the basics.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting. Like, one of the things I feel like I have struggled with and I'm like making an active effort to try to correct is projecting on guys shortening up, on them being so strong over time that they don't need to have, Javier Baez's swing, for me to think they're going to hit for power. They don't need to have Jazz Chisholm's rotational athleticism, right? Actually, let's look at Jazz because he's pretty interesting.
While you're calling up Jazz, I will talk about, that's one guy I can talk about. You just had Salas up there, Ethan Salas, right? And
yes,
this is a great example. Like, so in the offseason, I heard last year, oh, we signed this catcher, this ridiculous, this great contract, this high contract. And I was like, a catcher, really? A 17-year-old catcher? Or was he 16 at the time? I'm like, oh my God. So I go to spring training. I'm so curious to see his body. And I was so glad when I saw this was not a typical catcher's body. Like I relate him to Joe Mauer, now Hall of Famer Joe Mauer. He's a big rangy catcher. Like he's moves well for that catcher. And he has, the swing and to me, like he's much more tooled up and physical with a wide base of physical skills than your typical catcher, which is when I was like, yes, I was so excited to see that, as opposed to, I don't know, your typical catcher's body. Go ahead.
We're right. Like, and we're watching the video now and you can just see these Brewers lower level. Like this is from extended spring training of last year. This is, in March. Yeah. And Salas at this point is still 16 years old. And yeah, you can see the ease with which he does literally everything. This move here, like even this move from a traditional crouch into a one need position during the pitcher's delivery, this is like a Will Smith move. Like I get to set a good target and be athletic until and put myself in the framer's position on a knee only once I have to. And like, boom, there it is. And like, yeah, his maturity and the ease with which he does like basically everything is kind of nutty. And you see stuff like this and it's like, this guy's a 16-year-old catcher in this video and there are going to be issues. But yeah, like, not everyone has to be built like Machado or Tatis or Luis Robert or young Ethan Salas or, Wyatt Langford or Jackson Holiday to be a good major league hitter or even a really, really good major league hitter. But when you are put together that way, even if you're Lewis Brinson or Monte Harrison or whoever, you have a certain potential then that people who aren't put together like that don't have. And so when you have that physical capability, you just, you get more chances. And then, sometimes you are like Jose Siri or Jose Adolis Garcia, where for a while you struggle to even make the roster. Jose Adolis Garcia has been like DFA'd. Jose Siri, was sort of a pariah in Cincinnati for a while because he's such a weird guy. But when you're a 7 runner with 6 power and you're 25 years old now, like watch Estevan Florial maybe do something. Like he's got monster tools. He's super flawed. It hasn't worked really to this point. He's blocked by other more talented dudes, but now he's in his physical prime at like 25, 26 years old. He might have, pathway to an opportunity and he might have a 3-year window or whatever, where he's hitting 25 bombs and stealing 20 bases just because an athlete that talented is in his physical prime. And that's it. Like,
right. And so that, we see these physical tools, and that's where, again, fantasy players might say, okay, well, how do we know when they're going to come? I think everyone can spot a great athlete, or most people can. And then I would say, all right, look to see if they're correcting their fatal flaw, if there's been one in the past. Like to see if there's something that's happening where maybe they're going to bust out because they are correcting their fatal flaw. And most guys can't. But that might be a helpful way to put it.
Give you one more question, Kimball, and everyone. Just watch this Ethan Salas swing. Like he tucks his hands in. He's not fully extended on this pitch. He doesn't even really square it very well. And look at where he drives this ball anyway. Like he's half jammed by this and still like 16-year-old kid. Okay.
Yeah. He's a man child.
All right, Kimball. So
were you
last
shaking
question.
your head at my Joe Mauer comparison? Did you not like that?
I don't think so. I just think the last time I saw someone this talented was Adley Rutschman fall after his sophomore year, where I was just like, oh, this is like, holy shit. Anyway, last question. So this is a difficult question, Kimball. What should a layperson watching baseball focus on visually? Like, what should their attention be looking for? Like, what frame of mind are you in at the field to ensure that you are in a headspace that will be fruitful for your notes and digestion of the players?
I don't know if I understand that question, but I'm going to say, just the things we talked about, like, you trust your look for athleticism, but then see what they do with it and how they do it, right? Just, I mean, to put it simply, right? So you just, you just see them early. You just, who your eyes gravitating for that blend of strength and power and grace, and then see if it manifests itself on the field and how, like, and watch them at key moments, at their worst, like, their worst swing, how they handle the toughest pitch they face, not the cookie down the middle, and see what that tells you. To try and answer a tough question in this sort of simple way, I would just say that, and make sure you're well rested, that you don't drink too much caffeine. No.
Learning that one. But yeah, like my advice is put this thing away, do away with this. And I am looking for social minutia. Sometimes I'm sitting there and I'm doing like play-by-play broadcast in my head because it keeps me engaged in a way that is familiar and comfortable and warm. But I want to see if I'm looking for the way the hitter interacts with the umpire and the catcher socially as he's in the box. Almost always it will follow that what's happening from a baseball standpoint is just right there, because the minutia I'm focused on is like a layer below what it is I actually have to pay attention to. And that stuff then is just right there on the surface for like my understanding. Anyway, that's
I'll say one other thing. Not every scout does this, and probably most scouts don't, but I still score pretty much every game I'm at, and pitch by pitch. And maybe that's just my process, but that keeps me keyed in even when I'm, have potential to lose it. And I think that because so much of the game is about count, leverage, and situation. And so, I find that when I don't do that, I tend to drift off and be a lesser scout, but that might be just me.
So thanks so much for Nick and folks at Pitcherless for putting this together. I think it's really amazing. It's not lost on me how much efforts get put into organizing this. You can support Kimball by going to a Padres game.
Go buy my book. I'm mostly an author. Go buy
Kimball's book, When I'm with Dad, especially if you've got, if you're a dad. And then for, obviously folks should donate to the PitchCon cause if they have the means. And the same goes for, please subscribe to Fangraphs.
And buy Eric's book too.
Can buy, the book I co-authored with Kylie McDaniel that came out in April of 2020. If you so choose, you want to learn more about scouting, that's mostly what it's about. But yeah, mostly Fangraphs, especially as like sports media climate seems like it's changing the way the other one is, like the real one is, consumer interaction with publication in a direct sense is just going to become more and more important, folks. So thank you to Nick for having me. And I think it's time for the next panel.
Thank you, Nick.